What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining us. We are about to start our second half of our mega episode for while Steve is gone in Montana. And we had some pre-recorded stuff that we did, and after we were editing it, it didn't seem like the level of quality that we're used to putting out. So we thought, hey, why not give some bonus content? Why not do a little bit of news and kind of update on some stuff? And then we'll go right back into that content. So, of course, I'm James Norton. Steve's in the beautiful state of Montana. And
Big sky country, James.
Big sky country. I'm glad he's having a good time because, honestly, being trapped in the mountains of Minnesota sounds like a personal nightmare for me.
Did you say the mountains of Minnesota?
No, maybe
There are no mountains in Minnesota.
Yeah, it's just the mall.
I'm going to tell you a story. I'm just going to totally derail this right
I don't care. Do it.
Okay. So I'm 23 years old. I've graduated from college and have no idea what I'm doing with my life. My sister and brother-in-law, who live here, he's from Kaukauna, invite me out to do this trivia contest that happens here everywhere. Lawrence,
I've never participated in it, but I am familiar with it.
Okay, it's this 3-day-long trivia contest. Man, I'm going way off the rails.
Lawrence University trivia, if anyone wants to look into it.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Like 3 days, 48 hours, I think it is, or 72 hours. 48 hours straight.
Yeah, I want to say it's straight. That's the big thing.
Yep. Yeah. So we worked in shifts and stuff. Anyway, by the way, that's the team is Bank of Kaukauna, legend, for those of you who have followed in the past. Anyway.
I'm sure they've heard of you.
Oh, yeah. Winners 10 years running. Anyway. So the point is, right, this is about my own ignorance, James, that coming from Florida, I got off the plane in the Midwest, and I looked around, and I said, where are the mountains? Because in my head, anywhere that wasn't Florida had mountains. And my sister was like, oh, poor boy. You come to the flatlands.
You're like, no, but we got a quick trip.
Yeah.
And we got manners.
Yeah, that's right. All right, sorry.
No, you're good. So I've been to Minnesota a few times, and one of which was for my 30th birthday. And at the mall, they had a Star Trek exhibit. And cool. I have this photo, and it was the bridge of the original Enterprise.
No way.
And there's a photo of me sitting in the captain's chair, and you can just see on my face, I'm having a hard time not geeking out sitting in that chair. So that's why I'm a geek.
How who wouldn't geek out sitting in that chair?
Star Wars fans.
You see? Yeah, but who cares about them?
Yeah, I love them both, but I feel protective of Star Trek.
Agreed. Same here.
Yeah.
Same here.
So, as you may or may not have noticed, that's Stewart McLean, the owner of Moon Hot Media, who always makes us sound so velvety smooth.
Oh, you're so sweet.
I have a really important question. So, when was it that you realized that you were related to the main character of Die Hard?
Funny enough, I have a cousin, John McClane.
Oh, I bet he grew up in having so much crap.
He's my dad's age, so he was like,
he's like, I love it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I hear the John McClane thing a lot. Older generations, I think for my dad, it was more about Shirley MacLaine.
I don't know who that is.
Oh, she was an actress.
I'm guessing an attractive actress based on the way you know the twinkle in your eyes that you said that.
She was kind of a babe, but she McLean isn't even her real last name. She's
because it's such a good name they took it on.
Totally. No, I think she's Warren Beatty's sister. Actually.
Oh, you know what? Now that you say that, I think I vaguely remember that.
Yeah. Oddly, she was so much stuff she was in, and the thing that always pops in my head was this. She was in a Jerry Lewis movie called Artists and Models, which I know was not the peak of her career, but for some reason, when you ask who she is, that's what I think of. It's Jerry Lewis movie.
Jerry Lewis,
who's that?
Underrated actor, clearly.
Yeah.
So. All right, so you got anything that you're super into these days? Anything you bought? Anything you're just jiving with on the streaming services?
Oh man, what have I been listening to? My nephew just had a birthday, and he turned 16, and he has gotten into vinyl. What's his
name?
His name is Stewart. Actually.
Stewart.
Yeah.
Well, happy birthday, Stewart. 16's a fun age.
It is a fun age. So my brother recommended, hey, yeah, get him some vinyl. So I
At least you know he's never going to be buying drugs because he won't be able to afford them.
right spent all his money on vinyl.
Yeah.
So I bought him London Calling on vinyl, which
Great album.
classic album. I haven't heard from him whether he likes it or not, but so I listened to after I bought that. I was like, man, I'm gonna listen to that again. So
That's a classic.
yeah.
One of the times when I was on the Coal Mine Records page, they have a bunch of like really relatively unknown artists or artists that are kind of up and coming, definitely focusing more on like blues and stuff like that. But they had this interesting album that popped up. It was Barbara Howard. It was like a Cincinnati soul album.
Okay.
And it came out in the 70s. And my understanding from what I vaguely remember from the website was they found this obscure record in like a box at a record store that really wasn't very popular. And then they took it and they loved it so much that they started pressing it again.
Huh. That's pretty awesome, right? That something can just have new life like that.
Right. And I don't know a ton about Barbara Howard and stuff. So I got that sitting at home. That's on my to listen to list.
Okay.
And then the other thing, Tedeschi Trucks Band, their live albums are always like super flipped, like terribly like, oh, here's this album. It's going to be $90. And I'm like, no. So I got one for retail, actually wholesale to be perfectly honest. And it's live in Oakland. So that's something I'm working on at the moment too, but you got to be responsible and do housework and stuff like that. So I don't get to listen to music as much as I'd like.
Oh, you don't pop the music on while you're doing housework?
Yeah, it depends on what I'm doing. Like if it's noisy and I'm not truly going to be able to hear it, then I won't put it on, but usually, yeah.
Okay.
And then I got one more thing. Do you ever listen to any Alkaline Trio?
No. Not really.
Okay. Well, they were super popular here in like the early 2000s in this area.
Yeah. No, I remember them. They were. I think they were pretty nationally famous.
Well, the main guy, Matt Skiba, was in Blink 182 until recently.
Oh, okay.
So, and I actually saw them like early 2000s down at the Rave in Milwaukee with Dashboard Confessional and some band that I don't remember. But they had a copy of, I want to say it's their 2013 album, My Shame Is True.
Okay.
So I got that. That's pretty good stuff too. But just kind of hanging out waiting for record store day at this point.
Yeah.
Before I drop. And by the way, I did get off for record store day.
Oh, you did? Oh, good for you, man.
I know everybody was worried about that. So one of my coworkers, this delightful lady that's, we'll say, a little bit more senior to me, she took sympathy on me and she's like, yeah, I'll work your day.
Well, God bless you, mystery lady.
So Saint Stacy is her name.
Saint Stacy.
So she's a great lady.
That's awesome.
And then I imagine Steve's probably listening to like didgeridoos or banjo music or something.
Probably. I actually he asked me to rip some stuff for him so he could listen to some new music while he was up there. And I didn't have a lot of time. I think I made some weird decisions. So he's probably like, Stu, what is this? Come on,
Here's
man.
4 hours of Covenant.
Yeah, right. I gave him, I put some Dr. John on there.
Dr. John, everybody loves Dr. John, but I could never get into him.
I like him. I got into him a little bit, and I'm still sort of like trying stuff out here and there, but
he's like a psych rock, right?
Well, he kind of had different, I think, 2 different eras. I think early on it was psychedelic, more psychedelic stuff.
I think that's what I tried.
Okay, that's that's the stuff I like, man. I gave him the Gree album, the first one, back when he was Dr. John the Night Tripper.
Oh yeah, and they release a lot of Dr. John stuff for record store days.
Do they?
Like I feel like every record store day since I started collecting, there's always been some sort of Dr. John.
Yeah, I actually picked up that was one of them. His second album, I think I picked up, was a record store day release. I bought it like months afterwards because no one bought it.
So hopefully Steve appreciates you sending him a care package.
I hope
of music.
he does. I have this thing though when I hear Dr. John, like. I don't know who came first, but he sounds so much like Captain Beefheart to me. if you've ever
I
listened.
can't say that I know a lot of Captain Beefheart.
Oh
Also,
man, all right.
there's that one
that's some more
album that
weird
everybody
music.
always says of Captain Beefheart.
Trout Mask Replica.
Yeah, that's
Has to
it.
be, yeah.
That's on my list to check out of to experiment
It's
with.
friggin' weird.
That
yeah.
and King Crimson, the one where it's like the big, you can see up the guy's nose.
Yep.
That's on my.
In the Court of the Crimson King.
Exactly.
That's a good album. I think they made better stuff, but like 21st Century Schizoid Man off that album, that's like their Iron Man. You know what I mean? Like that's the song they pull out at the concert and everyone freaks out 'cause it's the one they all know.
Is that the song like they go, all right, everybody, we're done, and then people throw a fit, and then they come back out and play that song?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So
Okay, we're gonna play Purple Haze.
all right, I
Yeah.
guess we're gonna play this song that we don't even practice anymore because we play it so much.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I got some news for us.
What do you got?
So, Karma has finally come around for the Band Culture Club.
Uh-oh.
So they are ordered to pay $1.75 million to former bandmate John Moss. Last year, so he was a founding member, and he alleged that his former bandmates defrauded him of almost $250,000 after being expelled from the group.
Oh boy, George.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
That's a lot of money. Like I'm like, whoa, that's gotta hurt a little bit. And I would question whether we'll see any reunions after that.
Probably not. But you never know, man. I mean, music business is a cutthroat and strange business.
I will believe that they'll get together if I ever see Mike Love and Brian Wilson play together. then I will believe that anything is possible. I'll think there'll be peace
Are
in
those
the
two?
Middle
Are they
East.
done for good? Like they just don't play together, or
No, so Mike, I mean, I think it was a previous episode that you weren't involved in. I did a deep dive about like the big feuds, and that was one of them.
Yep.
And when I can't remember what it was, at one point they just had this massive thing where a whole bunch of the band members were all suing each other to try to take control of the name.
right?
And the way things shook out, Mike Love got control, and then they did like a reunion show for one of their anniversaries, and Brian Wilson's like, never again, never ever again.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, I get that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bummer, but yeah. I think Mike, from what I can gather, I think Mike Love is really irritated by the fact that Brian Wilson gets all the love as the genius in the band.
I'm gonna say that I am in the Brian Wilson camp.
I am too. I mean, generally speaking, but if you're gonna give credit where it's due, Mike Love wrote a lot of the hits that they had, especially early on. But like, you know, it's different from the Brian Wilson stuff, right?
That's very true. And it's gonna
Yeah.
be summertime soon, and we have car shows around here, so I'm sure we'll hear lots of Beach Boys coming up.
Oh yeah. Are you familiar with Smile? Do you know the Brian Wilson Smile album?
Is that the one where it was not originally released, and then they kind of had some content later that kind of came out, and it was like it was clouded in mystery and like stuff like that. Did they finally release that?
So Brian Wilson released it on his own. So he re-recorded the whole album. The Beach Boys album originally came out under the name Smiley Smile,
right?
Which was sort of like the salvaged sessions, you know, the songs from that session, and like that was I think it was a fine album, but you know, Brian had always had like this vision in his head, like, you know, what he really wanted it to sound like.
And Mike Love was not on board with that, from what I understood. Like he thought Brian was way too moody.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the dude's got issues.
Oh yeah, no doubt, and that's part of what makes him so great.
Yeah.
So, well, that and then like Pink Floyd too. Like
my goodness.
I would be surprised if Roger Waters ever does anything with them ever again.
Or if they'll have anything to do with Roger Waters, might be more the.
Well, I can't remember if it was Nick Mason or somebody, because he's re-recording. Roger is re-recording Dark Side of the Moon, and I think I want to say it was Nick Mason. Maybe I'm wrong on that. One of the members said that they heard his version of it, and it was genius.
I mean, it could be. It's hard. It's hard as a fan to imagine. Like, I mean, that album. How long was it the number one best-selling album?
If you go online and you look at any list about must-own albums on vinyl, that's one of them. Always.
And like, I mean, totally unoriginal feeling over here, but to me, that's the high mark for the sound of an album. Like, that album sounds so good to me. And I think a lot of people feel that way, like that it's the best sound. It's like the album people will put on to test their new speakers or something.
Oh, hands. My favorite Pink Floyd albums, Wish You Were Here, but that album,
a great album. Yeah.
That album is an absolute masterpiece. And Aaron, who used to do this show with us, younger guy, never listened to that album. That was one of the albums I gave him early on, and he was absolutely blown away. Especially like when it starts out with the heartbeat and then ends with the heartbeat.
Yeah.
He's like, just the idea that they did that, and that part where they make it sound like you blew your speakers out. I was like, just so good, beginning to end. So to me, re-recording that's almost like someone went to and ripped down the Mona Lisa and was like, I can do it better.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like that, but I mean,
he's doing
if it's really genius, I'm gonna want to hear it. You know?
He's doing Taylor Swift. He's re-recording his old content, and I think unfortunately that's the way the music business is going to be these days. I think we're going to see a lot of that.
Do you really?
Yeah.
I'm generally so opposed to the going back and changing.
Altering it.
Yeah,
I don't mind if they
George
do
Lucas.
Yes,
Star Wars and
original trilogy, and then they'll be like, we can't ever let you see the original version again.
Yeah, or even Steven Spielberg, like
E.T.
E.T. swapping out the guns with walkie-talkies. Like, I don't know. I just feel like you let the artifacts of the past be themselves.
Well, like here, big shout out to Disney. Disney. So there's the original Peter Pan movie. There's a lot of stereotypes for
Polly Wally Gum Gum. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
And they just have a disclaimer at the beginning of the movie when it plays on Disney Plus, where they're basically, I'm paraphrasing here, they're like, hey, we realize that there are some things that are offensive on here to indigenous people. We're aware of it, and we want to use it as a excuse to have a conversation about inclusivity and stuff like that, which I'm like, wonderful. I'm like, we don't need to have revisionist history. This is the way the movie was. Let's call it out and say, hey, that wasn't right, but let's not change the movie.
Yeah. I mean, even back in the 90s, way back then. If you remember that far back, I had some Little Rascals VHS tapes, and
those are terribly offensive.
And some of it, but Leonard Maltin had a little thing at the beginning. He comes on, he's like, basically the same thing, saying like, hey, this was the way it was. You're gonna probably find this offensive, when they use this term, but watch it, understanding it's an artifact of the era.
And I almost respect them for that.
Yeah.
So another kind of odd one here in my mind. This is odd. 32-year-old singer Ed Sheeran is working on an album to be released upon his death, telling Rolling Stone, I want to slowly make this album that is quote unquote perfect for the rest of my life, adding songs here and there. I just want it in my will that after I die, it comes out.
Do you think he's just like David Bowie just won when he died and put out Black Star? And he's like, and everyone else why didn't I do something like that? Or why don't I guess.
Well, if you ever watch him in interviews and stuff, I don't like Ed Sheeran's music, but I do think he's incredibly musically intelligent. I think he's creative and he's skilled. I just don't like the content that he puts out.
I'm not a fan of his music either, but and really don't know that much about him. But
I want to like him.
I really liked him in that movie Yesterday. Did you see that?
He was really good.
Yeah, he was fantastic. Yeah, so I'm sort of with you. I like him. I'm not really a fan, but I like him.
What got me was at one point he was on one of the late shows, and he essentially was saying he's like, any pop song can be played with 3 chords, and then they literally bring him out an acoustic guitar, and then they tell him to play a song randomly, and he does it, and they pick a different song and he does it, and he just nails it each and every single time.
Yeah.
So he has the chops to be incredibly intelligent. He's just choosing to kind of, for a lack of better word to use, kind of sell out and make this content. And
I assume it's what he likes.
Yeah. And I don't disrespect him for it. This is what he likes, this is what his fans like. He's very popular. It just isn't for me.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think the last thing I want to say about that is I think at some point that's going to get leaked. Like I think someone's going to hack into his computer. He's going to leave, some sound tech somewhere around his stuff. They're going to sneak it off his computer and they're going to release it.
And then he's going to have to kill himself.
Then he's going to have to kill himself immediately. Just kidding. We're not endorsing suicide.
Don't do it.
Yeah. So if I were to tell you a famous metal band is doing a ballet, who would you think it would be?
I actually know this because I saw a thing the other day about it and I was surprised.
Yeah, just say it.
One of my favorites, right? It's Black Sabbath.
It's Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
So famed British Cuban ballet director is, you know what? I actually forgot to write his name down. Sorry. I have to look that up later. It's a loose end for next time. He is actually doing a Black Sabbath ballet at the Birmingham Royal Ballet, which is in the city where Black Sabbath was formed.
Yeah.
He's promising thrilling dance from the original dance segments with the original recording. So these aren't like redone versions. It's the actual stuff off the album. So it's going to have Paranoid, Iron Man alongside a full orchestra and other songs as well from their catalog. And I'm like, I want to book a flight to England right now.
Yeah, right?
I was like, well,
why not?
This sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you think back and you're like, oh, Metallica essentially did this with an orchestra without ballet. And I'm like, I can't imagine this being bad. And I remember looking up this director. He was a dancer and he really, everything he did was good. So I'm like, he's going to do a good job with this.
Yeah, I mean, this is like... I suspect it's going to bring conceivably more heavy metal fans to ballet than it will bring ballet aficionados to heavy metal. If you know what I mean. Like,
I would tend to agree with you on that. So speaking of ballet, Apple just launched their kind of a companion app to Apple Music. It is basically Apple Music, but it's for classical music. Like that came out yesterday, actually, the 28th. And it actually, like, you load it up and it's literally just classical music. Looks exactly like Apple Music. They got interviews with modern classical music artists and stuff like that. Violinists, pianos, they got all the classic works. I looked it up, downloaded it, and I believe it's free if you have Apple Music to begin with.
Okay.
And I listened to a couple of things on there because I do like classical music. Yeah. It's not my main go-to, but I felt like they did a good job with the app. Part of me, though, is like, did we really need a separate app?
I mean, maybe that's just a testament to how far removed most people feel from like the world of classical music, right? Yeah, they don't want it cluttering up their regular...
I think more than likely what
music
probably is it's probably the people who like classical music don't want to go through all that other stuff. That's my guess.
Could be. I too like classical music. I'm very ignorant of it. Like
same.
Terms, like I know some of the big names. I certainly recognize famous pieces, but like, my knowledge is like very shallow. And I'd like to know, more. I mean, I've got some records and some CDs and stuff that I like. So you're like sort of made my brain go in a whole bunch of different directions just talking about.
Well, that's what this is about.
I've heard this complaint. It was like back in the 50s and 60s actually that people started saying it. They were like, this complaint that all of a sudden people's music collections were becoming very specialized. Like people only listen to rock music,
I would agree with that from what I overall.
And there was this feeling that like, we've always, for the most part, like people's interests were often varied. They were varied, like they had classical and they had, jazz and they had rock and roll that was happening at the time.
I think people get trapped though into their collections. Like, I don't know about you, but definitely at one point, like early on in my collecting, I felt like I was really identified with loving classic rock music. So I felt this compulsion that I had to have a lot of classic rock in my collection.
Yeah.
When all actuality, like in high school, like that was my jam, and it still is. I love classic rock music. But nowadays, honestly, I spend more time listening to blues and soul music.
Yeah. I've definitely found myself like exploring other like genres that like I felt like I kind of liked but hadn't gotten into as much.
Yeah.
And actually, you say soul music. For me, that's another one. Like I was not super heavy into it.
I still consider myself a novice in it.
Yeah, yeah. But I find myself wanting to listen to it more. I find it's in the evenings.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's no better night because I got like lights behind my records, like almost like it's like string lights.
Okay.
And then I got some lights under like my shelf where my TV's on and stuff like that. So I turn just those on. I put some soul music on, and there's just something immensely relaxing
Like hits
about
the
it.
mood, yeah.
Oh, it's so satisfying.
Yeah.
And then, maybe like a beer here and there type of thing.
Yeah.
Just some of my favorite nights over the last couple of years.
I really discovered a while ago, like that I had a like time of day connection to the music that I wanted to listen to that was like fairly consistent. And I worked this job here in town in a warehouse, and it was just me most of the time by myself, like putting together these hydroponic machines. And so like one of the first things I did was like I brought in like my hi-fi stereo so I could just like crank jams all day.
Nice.
And like
So you could kick out the jams, motherfucker?
I totally kicked out the jams, motherfucker. Yeah, I found like in the morning, like I want to listen to like heavy metal or like hardcore or like I really like that like fast, hard, heavy music in the morning.
Anything fast and like, I don't know, like high energy.
Yeah. And some people, they're like, oh, it gives me a headache. But like, I'm putting in Megadeth or All or
Down in
something.
that coffee.
Like, yeah, like feeling good.
Fighting somebody if they come up.
Yeah. And then it like slowly, like in the middle of the day, like it's kind of a grab bag. Like I'll go up and down with stuff. But
Me, it's like pop punk in the middle of the day.
yeah, like pop punk. I'll listen to some weird stuff. Like, I'll bust out the prog rock in the middle of the day and then some like classic,
Always comes back to prog rock with you.
It's some point, yeah. And but then like as the day would wind down, like around like 4 o'clock, all of a sudden like that's when I would like I want to listen to jazz now. So like I would come the Hank Mobley or the Miles Davis or something, and
I need some more trumpet in my life.
yeah, you do.
I think everybody does. Stu has this absolutely wonderful photo of Miles Davis up on the wall behind him, and that's what was catching my eye when I made that joke. But no, absolutely, I'm the same way. Just
yeah. What do you like to listen to in the morning?
So in the morning, I mean, I would definitely say something more along the lines of like arena classic rock type stuff.
Okay.
Just something where someone's gonna come out and there's just heavy drums. There's not necessarily guitar solos, but crunching guitar riffs and stuff like that. Kind of like we're gonna talk about in one of our pre-recorded segments later in this episode, like Thin Lizzy, like that type of stuff. Like someone's gonna come out and they're gonna rock my face off, and it just makes me want to go out and attack the day.
Yeah.
That type of stuff. And I want to play it loud, like real loud, to the point where my dust jacket on my record player is vibrating from all the bass, which I can't do on my wife's home because
I was gonna say the pandemic has changed all this, like my music listening habits, because my wife works from home now almost all the time. So we gotta be respectful.
And she looks at me and she's like, "It would be nice if you'd ask me what I want to listen to," and I'm just like.
Listen, when you waste all your disposable income on a hobby, then you can...
Right.
Yeah.
And I try to imply that to her in the nicest way possible, where it's like, this is my hobby.
Yeah.
I do this hobby for me.
Yeah.
So usually it's like I just put on something relatively mild when she's home. So, and then like in the middle of the day, maybe like some Alkaline Trio, maybe some, All-American Rejects, that kind of stuff. And then at night, like GA20, Tedeschi Trucks Band, anything that's got some feeling to it.
Yeah.
Just that emotion. I do like a little bit of gospel too, like what is it? The Harlem Gospel Travelers, I believe it was. Guess we got another loose end. They came out with a soul album earlier. I want to say it was late last year. That's high energy. That I can throw that in the morning too sometimes. It's just all about, I'm really subjective to the energy of the music to set my mood.
Yeah. Yeah, me too.
more or less.
Me too.
So, kind of another music related thing, not music related thing. Lady Gaga's costume for the upcoming Joker movie, and I'm going to butcher this. It's Joker Folie Dukes. I probably screwed that up.
Okay.
It's a full on musical, this like Joker movie that's coming out, and she's going to be kind of like the centerpiece of it. And this is, of course, is going to be her interpretation of the character Harley Quinn, the Joker's kind of partner in crime, former psychologist that kind of goes off the deep end that goes along with him. And I am a huge fan of Lady Gaga in a sense that I think she's immensely talented. I think she's definitely got like a huge David Bowie vibe going on with her. I love it when she goes off of her normal, where, trying to think of it like her classic normal type of songs. Those are okay. But when she like did that thing, what was it, at the Grammys, where she played with no makeup on, actual instruments like acoustic guitar, and she just nails it singing and stuff like that. That's what I like to see. Or when she played those songs on A Star Is Born, like that's the Lady Gaga I love.
Yeah. I've been surprised by seeing her do that, and I think she's talented. I can't say that I actually like the disco stuff better.
You're like, rah, rah, whoa, mama.
For what I've heard, let me take a ride in your disco stick.
That's a classic song. I'm not going to criticize that.
Yeah, but I mean, for my money, I liked the old, I can't remember the actor's name. Was it Chris Cooper in A Star Is Born?
Bradley Cooper.
Bradley Cooper. I liked his songs better.
He's a talented guy, no doubt that. So Motley Crue's Nikki Sixx has announced he has recorded a bass part for Dolly Parton's upcoming rock album.
Huh.
I was like,
how about that?
I was like, well, when I first heard Dolly Parton was doing a rock album at 77, I'm like, awesome.
Yeah.
I was like, I will eagerly listen to that.
Yeah.
She's trotting out a whole
she can kind of do no wrong. Whatever. Even if like I don't.
She gives
I'm not listening to it, like I just like Dolly.
She gives free books to children.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't care what she does.
Yeah.
Someone that I, don't really care for whatsoever. Kanye West says he is thankful to Jonah Hill for his performance in 21 Jump Street, taking to social media for the first time in months, saying he likes Jewish people again.
Oh, hey, good. You know what, Jonah Hill, good for you for
thank you for saving
representing
Kanye.
The race, man. Yeah. Good for you. Like, Kanye, come on.
I'm sure this has nothing to do with his failing clothing line that's getting completely smeared because of all of his anti-Semitic comments and realizing that
can't be.
Being super duper anti-Semitic is bad for business. So I don't believe it.
No, probably. Yeah. Well, I mean, dude's not mentally stable. Like,
no. What's his name?
He says, yeah. You. I don't know.
Like I said in the previous episode,
probably like Kanye.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Like a few episodes back before, your time there, like I said, I feel like that guy's one, accident away from becoming a Marvel supervillain.
Right.
Dude's crazy. So.
Yeah.
All right. So I kind of alluded to this, but didn't go super in depth with Stu prior to recording. Afro Man has posted footage from a police raid on his house last August in music videos and is now being sued by the police department.
Oh,
so.
Oh, that is interesting.
Oh, yeah. So if you're not familiar with Afro Man, in the early 2000s, he had a pretty, couple popular songs. His big one.
Man or Afro Man? Was that his?
What's that?
Man or Afro Man? Was that his band?
Oh, I've only ever known him as...
I'm just kidding.
I've only ever known him as Afro Man. He said, I was going to say his big song was Cause I Got High.
Oh, sure. Yep.
Classic song. And I do plan on...
the end at Half Baked.
Correct.
Yeah.
So the Ohio police searched his home on suspicion of drug trafficking and kidnapping. They found no evidence and filed no charges against him. Well, first of all, if you're going to go into some dude's house and search his house for drug trafficking and kidnapping, that's a pretty bold claim. Like, I feel like you need to have your ducks in a row before you...
Yeah, right? Like, imagine they must have had some plausible... Well...
Supposedly.
They should have some plausible evidence that this is taking place.
Yeah, I don't know. So Afro Man, whose real name is Joseph Foreman, had spoken to NPR recently and said they kicked in his door, they broke his video surveillance system, stole money from him, and frightened his family. He went on to say, I asked myself, as a powerless black man in America, what can I do to the cops that kicked in my door, tried to kill me in front of my kids, stole my money, disconnected my cameras, and the only thing I could come up with is make funny rap song about it that makes some money, use the money to pay for the damages they did, and move on.
Sounds reasonable.
I think so. He created merch and took to social media calling out the officers involved. I'm like, good for him. Honestly, he's got a platform, and I'm like, great.
Uh-huh. But clearly they feel like they're not being appropriately compensated for the use of their likeness or something.
Exactly.
Is that what it is? Yeah.
Four deputies, 2 sergeants, and detectives from the Adams County Sheriff's Office are accusing the rapper of profiting from unauthorized use of their likeness. So, only thing I'm going to say on that is, Afro Man, you do you.
Yeah. It just occurred to me when he said his name was, do you think like Afro Man originally came from a misspelling of foreman, and it was like Fro Man, and he was like, I got it.
I think so. And maybe a little, recreational drug use as well. And then probably the fact that he had an afro on top of it, and he's probably like, I got an idea.
It all came together.
Full circle.
Like, yeah.
Full circle.
Kismet.
So, all right, guys. So stay tuned. We're going to kind of cut into some of our pre-recorded content from our last episode.
I don't know, man. This feels like this was a full episode.
Just about. We were talking a lot. So guess what? You guys get bonus content. And then at the end, we're just going to touch base with you again. So enjoy the content. You will hear Steve Main's lovely voice during this segment. All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the content that we made for you. We really want to say something to Steve. You got anything you want to say to Steve in case he checks this episode out? I got something I want to say.
You got something you want to say to Steve?
Yeah, I do.
I was gonna, actually, Steve, if you're listening, my wife and I are putting you down as a reference for maybe adopting a new dog. So just maybe expect that phone call.
Yes, and if you mess this up, and it's going to be on you that this dog doesn't have a home.
Right.
You got one job. Don't screw it up. So Steve, man, I miss you. I love you. I hope you're doing well. I hope you get all that house building done. You're a heck of a guy, and I look forward to seeing the havoc and the fun that you bring to every room that you walk into.
Hell yeah, man. We got exciting stuff to do here when you get back. So
yeah. And then
don't stay gone forever.
Yeah, you better not stay gone forever. So we're probably looking at per our most recent estimation from Steve, he'll probably be back around late April. Depending on Stu's and my schedule lining up, we may try to sneak another episode in before that. Regardless of, however that all shakes out, once Steve gets back, we're going to try to get back to our normal routine. And I want to say thank you to everybody who's been listening, the people who are telling their friends about it, our fans, and apparently we got fans in India, we got fans in Japan, we got fans in Australia and Sweden as well. And of course, that's
what makes it all worth it.
It does. It absolutely does. I mean, I don't know who's listening to us in those countries, but just understand we appreciate it, and I'm super happy about it.
Yes, unless it's like some weird secret police shit.
Right.
Then we're not happy about it.
Or it's somebody who's planning to come take our records.
Right.
So
they're all in terrible condition.
Yeah, terrible condition. So last 2 things I want to say to you is just remember when you're out buying records, shop local, shop often, support the businesses that you love. And then last but not least, there's always more vinyl.
What do you guys think are some of the reasons that might keep bands from pressing vinyl? You guys got any?
I mean, I think lack of knowledge on how to do it is probably one.
Yeah.
What prevents bands from pressing vinyl?
Yeah, I think
right now there's just such a glut of people trying to do it. You got to prepare like a year in advance.
I think it's at least 9 months as the turnaround currently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it has improved some. I know. Gosh, right. It was either right before COVID or right during COVID. There was the big vinyl plant fire down in Texas.
Yeah, that was a proprietary one. It was an important one because it affected all of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so but I think a lot of that has kind of righted itself, so to speak. And me talking to artists and some of my artist friends, it's a lot of times it's down to money. You know?
I mean, if my understanding is it's expensive.
Yeah.
It's more expensive than making a CD is, for example. CDs are so like dirt cheap these days.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I think most bands that are doing it, unless they really want a high professional quality CD, they're just buying a decent quality CD burner and a rack of DVDs off a Best Buy shelf, and they're printing them as they need. And 'cause I mean, there's some pretty decent quality label makers and printers and whatnot. You can
A lot
do
of
those.
bands aren't even doing that now.
Yeah.
I mean,
a lot of bands are just like
Spotify, Apple Music.
It's just digital
Man, I
formats,
remember
and that's it.
late 90s when we were putting out cassette tapes and just dreamed of being able to put out a CD because
Yeah, it's like,
those
oh,
were
that's
so
the goal.
expensive back then. Yeah.
Yeah, I did just some quick research on like cost of runs, and like if you want to do a run of 100 records, which is about the smallest run you can do unless you really want to pay, $20-$30 per record. But like the run of 100 is kind of a fairly standard, and it's about $1,600 for that run. So $16 per record that they're paying.
That's
out.
probably bare bones.
Yeah, and they try to sell them, anywhere between $20 and $30, to make a little money.
Does that include anything aside from the record pressing?
That like when I ran through the format on a couple of different pressing companies, that was a black vinyl with a full color insert. Or it's not insert.
Label?
The label on
sleeve?
the record. The label on the record, full color. It was a full color inside and out jacket, one side open with a white, standard paper sleeve.
Yeah.
So
The kind of paper sleeve that will scratch your records
but
up?
it wasn't. I mean, there's a lot of different options. You can get, certain things engraved and, this, that, and the other, and high gloss, whatever. It was a fairly standard, like pretty much any record you'd buy. I mean, like you can get like just black and white labels. You can get no labels if you want and put your own on. I mean, there's different ways to do it.
That's interesting considering my knowledge of how the process of making a record.
Yeah. Typically, the labels are put into the puck when they press it, and it's like melted in, like forged in.
That's usually where the pressure is applied, is the puck.
Yeah.
Initially.
Yeah, that's kind of where it starts and goes out. And then that I also did include like the record company does the mastering, so because that's another cost. You could save that money if you happen to have a friend that's good at mastering. You could master it yourself. But a lot of bands, maybe they do know, maybe they don't know somebody that can master. Because from what I've learned too, like mastering for vinyl is different than mastering for CD or digital or magnetic tape. It's all they're all kind of their own different processes.
Well, you definitely can't have too much bass content in a record. Because it'll make the needle jump.
Well, what it is you have to run equal bass on left and right channels. That's the big thing.
Okay.
Because otherwise it'll bounce back and forth from left to right channel.
Yeah, weren't there some famous mixes of certain records that had notoriously high bass that actually made it so the needle would just jump off immediately? Like, gosh, I wish I could. I'm going to have to look that up now.
Yeah. And it very well could be that it was
Metal Machine music or something like.
Yeah, then they had to remix it and do a completely different version.
And they
of the
probably
album.
just used a master edition that was not mastered for vinyl, and where like there was more bass on the left channel than the right, and that's what gets it to because it'll literally just bounce off when it hits that left side. It bounces over.
I remember reading somewhere that like bands used to. Like the kind of song that they would have at the beginning of the record would be different from the kind of songs they do at the end. And it had like the ones at the beginning, like your track one, right? Like on side A would have tons of bass because there was more room for the needle to move. But by the time you got to the end of the record, they'd be doing like the light acoustic numbers. More often because they required less. Otherwise, like you couldn't have the wide grooves.
That's interesting because I can think of that because I can think of listening to albums where they'd always end soft like that.
Yep, and that's interesting too. On one of these segments that we just did here, where I did the Bellwether album review, I happened to go. I was looking for some information because there wasn't a lot of information on the physical album copy. So I went to Spotify because a lot of times bands will have descriptions and dates and whatnot. And I noticed that the track numbers were different from Spotify to the album. There was a couple of different songs rearranged, and I wonder, maybe I'll have to talk to Eric and see if there was any, if that was one of the reasons.
You should definitely ask, because I really kind of want to know.
Yeah, that would be, that's kind of interesting.
I can't remember where I read that. It was a long time ago, but yeah.
So a run like I said, run of 100 was about $16 per record, and if you go up to a run of 200, literally $1 per record savings. Like not much. Not much
if
of
you're
a
a
saving.
struggling band, that's not much savings.
Yeah, so for a run of 200, $3,000. Like that could be the difference between, are we going to tour or not? This year, there's been a couple of different bands that have had shows scheduled for our area over the next couple months, and they've now just been coming out saying, "Yep, sorry, we're canceling these shows," and they're like, "Yep, sorry, we're doing this, but like we just don't have the money to tour right now." And it's like, oosh, like that's kind of scary, because I mean they're great bands, and that's how a lot of these bands are making their money, is by playing shows, but they don't have the money to do it. And it's probably possibly because maybe like, well, we have this studio project and it's picking one over the other. What are we going to do? And the third factor that I looked at was doing a run of 1,000. And that significantly brought it down. So to do a run of 1,000, it was like roughly $5,800. So that's only $5.80 per unit, which is like, per unit, that's cheap. Now you can really make some money. But as a band, a smaller starting out band, 1,000 records is a lot of flipping records to try and peddle.
Oh yeah, I mean bands, sort of notorious for having like boxes of their products sitting in their garage.
Yeah,
there's only so much you can sell.
Some of these bands, maybe they don't own a house, maybe they don't have the storage. So now they got to rent a storage unit. Like there's, so many factors in there that do that. And it's just,
well, maybe
it's just
these bands should not suck.
Wow, that's dirty, James. It's dirty. What do you got in that bubbler? Is that vodka bubbly? You're getting a little ornery over here. So yeah, if any of y'all out there listening are a band and you have any input on that, I'd love to hear your opinion and whatnot. I also trying to figure out some a decent way to get some decent recordings of interviews over the phone, and we'd love to start doing some artist interviews and kind of bring you some different.
I've talked to some other people who are interested in maybe discussing more of these technical issues about record collecting and vinyl and the machines themselves.
Yeah,
it's such some other aspects of this that I think our listeners would be interested in hearing.
Yeah, well, I mean, just the process of making a record. One of the most intricate that it's such a, I don't know, I just find it so flippin' fascinating beyond the collecting and the maintenance, and I mean that's one aspect of it, but just the more I look at what goes into making a record and how many few record pressing plants there are, and beyond that even just the record cutting plants that there are. I believe there's only one or two in the country that actually cut and what's the process where they spray the film on to make the stamps? What is it?
I don't know. I do have a question for you about record making.
Yeah.
So you earlier, and depending on how this segments play out, you showed us a really nice album where it's got like streaks of color in it.
Yeah, it's like the base
Splatter.
is clear.
Splatter.
Yeah, but but the base is like, it's very clear, and there's a lot of clear opaque.
Do you know how they get the color in that?
Not specifically. I imagine it's just mixing chips.
It's black magic.
Yeah.
No, so shout out to the Eroding Winds. The owner, Adam, actually explained to me how that gets made. And it doesn't matter what plant it is. It's literally every single plant does this. So they'll have the puck there, and somebody puts it on a hot pad, like a hot tray, like you'd fry like stakes on or whatever, and someone sits there literally and does that by hand.
The hand molding. Yep.
Yeah, that was made by someone hand, and then these plants will pay someone, like, typically if it's like overseas in like a poorer country, say like Czechoslovakia, maybe like $2 or something an hour to sit and do that, just that. And then like in California, it's probably something like $5 or more an hour to do that.
Great. And so, are you saying that they do that and then that puck gets shipped?
Well, then the puck goes over, depending on the process, but then the puck goes to the machine and gets pressed like that.
I would
but
think
somebody
it's more
has
than
to
$5 an hour in California.
But somebody has to arrange the color.
Yeah, because some of these things, but
it's like $5 more an hour.
Oh, yeah.
Like additionally, just to do that.
Sure, gotcha.
Yeah, like because I don't remember growing up as a kid like ever seeing some of the color variants that they have. Like, where they'll be like basically, you got your 12-inch record, and 25% is blue, and 25% is orange, and 25% is white, and 25% is yellow, or whatever the 4 colors are.
There are some places that specialize in doing like off-color pressings like that, and they will have very limited batches of it because somebody has to do that.
Yeah, it's very labor-intensive.
Right, and that part of it maybe is something we could do a segment on at some point, because I find it immensely interesting, just because you'd probably have some variation in the color schemes and things like that. Really, every single one of those could potentially be very different.
Oh yeah,
and
I don't
almost
think
like a unique piece
with those
of art.
color variants. I don't think there's 2 that are the same.
Yeah, I wouldn't
not
think
identical
so
anyway.
Yeah, they're similar patterns, but still 100% random.
Were either of you guys into picture discs?
I bought one once. I put it on. I didn't know anything about it, and it was Elton John's Yellow Brick Road. I got it at Walmart, and I heard how awful it sounded, and I purely bought it because of how it looked, and it kind of turned me off of them. And then later, I kind of came to the conclusion from more long-term collectors, those are really meant to be displayed.
Yeah,
okay.
I have a couple. I have Tenacious D Pick of Destiny.
Oh, really?
That's cool.
Actually,
I saw it. That's cool.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Okay.
And then I have another one. It's a punk rock. I can't remember if it's AFI or who it is. Because it's one of those things that just kind of like it's down in these are my special records, type of thing. Because it is more like you say a display. It's kind of a display piece.
But maybe we should look up too and see if there's different types of picture discs.
I'd be interested.
I think they're probably just cut vinyls. I'm sure they just put that picture down and somehow coat it in a clear resin, and then they cut it in there.
But that's a universally accepted thing, though, that the audio quality is not as good as like an actual album. So I would be interested to learn what the process is.
I'd like to compare. I've got Blondie's Parallel Lines as a picture disc.
Ooh, nice.
That's one of my favorite.
But maybe we could sit down and actually do a video of it or something at one time.
Yeah.
Or something. Yeah. Oh, I suppose then we get in trouble for legal stuff.
We're outlaws.
They ain't gonna catch us.
Like Johnny Cash.
Another thing I learned in my dive into figuring out exactly how this process works is with the different colored vinyls or the different colored materials, is each of those colors have very specific temperatures at where they need to be pressed for high quality. And that's one reason that a lot of these reissues on colored vinyl can vary so much in quality, because some plants, they just, if they have say the temperature is 32 degrees Celsius or whatever it is that they press a black vinyl at, they'll press red vinyl at that same temperature, or orange. But the different material, the different colors are all made with kind of different material mixes, and they're very temperature specific. And
right.
So if a pressing plant doesn't adhere to those temperature changes as they're going through, that's when you can get these really horrible sounding noisy records. It's because they're not pressing them at the right temperature for that color. Now,
I actually had heard that as well.
Yeah, there's just, and that's what I find so fascinating about the whole process. Is there's just like, I think it's kind of a quote off of Bad Religion song that I can't think of right now, but so many factors exist out there.
My understanding pre-2016 was when really there was nobody paying attention to that. Mm-hmm. So that's why color versions from before that are really the worst, and those are the ones that really gave them a bad reputation.
Yeah.
So beyond that, I think it probably depends on the plant. But I agree with you. Everything you're saying about, the specificity.
Specificity.
Yeah, I think our listeners know what I'm saying. Yeah, and I haven't had any alcohol today. That's just how I talk.
His blood sugar's low.
Yeah, but those different factors and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, it's cool. I plan on every week I do more and more. I go down weird rabbit holes on.
But that's the fun of this.
Yeah.
Is we're learning things.
Exactly. We're learning.
A day you learn something is a day that isn't wasted.
Thanks, Mr. Rogers. We got to get a picture of Stu going doing the hands open motion where it says "the more you know."
The more you know. Yeah, we'll put little rainbows in.
Yeah.
So that's my story.
That's what you got.
And you're sticking to it.
I'm sticking to it.
So if you recall back to one of our previous episodes, we had talked about Cliff Burton of Metallica and basically how tragic his death was. So we talked about what kind of things might have come out of it, what we think maybe the band would have been different, just basically what if. So I prepared another one of those, going back to Bluesy Huey Lewis for a minute. Philip Paris Lynott, and maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong. Who knows? So he was the bassist and lead singer for the band Thin Lizzy. So he was born August 20th, 1949 at Hallam Hospital in West Bromwich, England. So his parents were Philomena Lynott, an Irish author and entrepreneur, and Cecil Paris, and he served in World War II in the military. So anyone who knows the band knows that Philip is a black man. And what we may not know is his mother was white and his dad was black. So given the time that he grew up and when his parents met, there was actually an awful lot of racism going on. So his mother, in one of the documentaries I watched, talked about how she met Cecil at a dance and he came over and asked her to dance. And then after she danced with him, all the other girls were refusing to stand by her. And yeah, that's messed up. And then it even goes even further. After they were outside, some white guys came up and were harassing her, and they were literally going to attack her because she danced with a black man. That's absolutely messed up. So Phil's not even born yet, and his life is touched by massive amounts of racism.
Crazy.
So, all right. So, best I understand about this is he grew up with a lot of the time with his dad being in the picture. Not because, his dad wasn't involved, but his dad was out traveling the world. He was in the military and things like that, and he was serving. And he absolutely came in and helped them out at times. He was considered to be kind of like the consummate Irishman. He wasn't just a black guy. He was a true, at his heart, an Irishman, and he embodied everything that there was in Ireland.
It's black Irish.
Right. And they even said he was probably one of two black guys in Ireland at the time growing up. So in his early years, he found music through his Uncle Tommy's records. His first band was called the Black Eagles in 1965. Then in late 69, Thin Lizzy formed with Eric Bell, keyboardist Eric Wixon, and drummer Brian Downey. The name came from a comic book with what was called the Dandy, which, kind of reminds me of almost like Mark Bolan.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and the character was called Tin Lizzy. So that's where they got the name from.
Yeah, so it's it's like a joke on the way the Irish people also pronounce a TH, a 10 Lizzie.
Right.
10, he was 10. He was a 10 man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he was the
terrible
front man.
accent.
That's pretty bad Irish coming from an Irish boy.
So anyone who's Irish listening to this, we'd like to apologize for Stu.
right.
He does not represent
Especially Stu wants to apologize.
This is a segue, but I was once trying to do a Jamaican accent on a record. It was like a joke song some friends and I were doing, and it somehow became Irish in my attempt. So, like,
Were you drinking?
I mean, most likely. Yeah.
That's a yes.
And to be fair, Stewart is Scotch-Irish.
To be fair, no.
To be fair now.
I'm fairly certain that somewhere in this house there's probably a pot of gold.
I know there's some pot.
There is not.
Unless you're a cop. So, all right. So Phil was the front man in a bunch of different bands before he would eventually learn the bass from his friend Brendan Shields. And from what I gather from it, like, he was diehard. Like, he was there, like, constantly, like, learning the bass, putting the effort in, putting the time in. And his friend was just happy that, you know, Phil basically was going to have something to do besides just sing when he was on stage. Because this was, like, in a time when, like, long drum solos and guitar solos were very common. So, like, when they'd be playing shows with some of the other bands he was in, he'd just walk off stage for a while because, like, he didn't have anything to do. So the band's first big hit kind of came in 1972 when they did the classic rework of the traditional Irish folk song Whiskey in the Jar. Phil wanted this to be a B-side to the song Black Boys Are on the Corner. The record company didn't agree. They reversed the decision. They leaded with this single, and it was actually a huge hit. Mm-hmm. Like, that's a great song, and then, of course, Metallica would later cover it. Their next big hit was on the album Jailbreak in 1976, The Boys Are Back in Town. If you don't know that song, I think you should climb out from under the rock you were in.
It's one of my favorite songs to play up at the bar when we go up to hunting camp.
Oh, yeah?
Because when we come into town, like, we take it over. So we take it over these little tiny towns, and yeah, I have to pop that on the jukebox. I mean, the boys get a little wild. It was always kind of fun.
You get wild?
Just a little. Just a wee lad.
Well, if the boys want to fight, you better let them.
That's what they say. The band would go on to release several more well-received albums. Johnny Fox, 1976, Bad Reputation, 1977, and, of course, Live and Dangerous. And then, let's see here, A Rock Legend in 1979. By the 1980s, the band, I think that was Black Rose, if I was remembering correctly.
That sounds right.
Yeah, Black Rose, A Rock Legend was in 1979. By the 80s, they were really, honestly, like, struggling pretty bad commercially. In the early stages of the band, so like in the early 70s, Phil was described as shy. It wasn't until they toured with Slade in 1972 where he got his kind of legs underneath him. It was after the first night opening for them. Slade's manager, Chaz Chandler, formerly of the Animals, threatened to kick them off the tour. He thought they were going to bore the crowd to death.
Whoa.
So apparently Phil, like, took this so personally. He was in tears. He was just, like, beside himself. So then, you know, his impeccable motivation kind of took over, and then he would eventually become an incredibly dynamic frontman and learn to really just work the crowd. Yeah, this kind of coupled with the fact that he had just, like, an impeccable sense of style. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever, like, looked at a couple photos of him. Like, I would struggle to think of a photo where he wasn't dressed great, even by today's standards.
Really?
Yeah.
Like, he was so stylish, and people would be dropping money back in the day, but he was like a thrift store shopper. It was just something about it. He was charismatic. He looked cool. He knew how to work the crowd. It was awesome. So it wasn't until the latter part of the 70s and early 80s where there was kind of like darkness looming. Guitarist Scott Gorham reported that by 1979, the band was absolutely swamped by heroin. This is a quote from him. "We always dabbled, but not in the super class A stuff. It wasn't until we got to the Black Rose album when we were in Paris in a hotel, Phil called me up and said, 'I got something to show you.' I had dabbled with heroin in California before, but I wasn't when I came to England. England was saving me. I didn't know anyone who did it. I was really clean and felt good about life." So, you know, basically, as an example, Phil was kind of sucking the band into it to a point. Mm-hmm. And then after numerous lineup changes and failed solo projects and difficult years of touring, the band performed their last show September 4th in 1983 in Nuremberg. Phil would go on to do other side projects. None of them really picked up steam. There was a lot of conversation over the next few years about reforming the band. They actually even recorded some new material in 1985, like in a private studio, and that got lost. Like after Phil's death, like none of them know what happened to it.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Are you sure that's not going to resurface for Record Store Day?
I think that would actually be a really big thing. And like some of the band members, when they'd talk about it, they're like, it was really good. And it was kind of sad. So Christmas Day, 1986. Phil's family was opening up gifts. He had 2 daughters and 1 other kid, but he didn't know about the other. Well, he knew about the other one, but he didn't know where he was. He had a son that didn't find out who his dad was until years after Phil was dead. So he went upstairs, he ingested a sizable dose of heroin, and then he came downstairs and promptly passed out. His mother contacted his wife. His wife told him this is a very serious thing. They rushed him to the hospital. He was told that he was septic. So those who don't know what that means, that's basically a system-wide infection. He had pneumonia, and he would die just 10 days later on January 4th.
It's a rough way to go.
He was 36 years old.
Apers.
Young.
Yeah. That's that's like 8 years like younger than I am now.
Wait, you're how old? No.
Yeah. So what do you guys think happened? To me, I think this is a pretty obvious case that drugs numbed and slowed down a highly motivated and creative man.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which we've seen it how many times throughout rock and roll history. Just that damn H, man. It's just it's a killer.
Well, you hear like a lot of guys talk about it. Keith Richards, that's who's popping in my mind. But I know I've heard this from other guys too, that a lot of it just comes from the boredom of touring, in the sense that like you wind up spending 8 hours in a hotel room with nothing to do, and you can't go out anywhere, and you're just like, you gotta kill time before the show.
You might as well be passed out on a bed.
Yeah, why not? Like, I mean, it's just a way to like kill time. And then after the show, everyone wants to party with you,
Mm-hmm. And then you're tired from all the heroin.
Yeah, totally. So,
Yeah,
I think that's
in
part of
other
what
ways,
happens.
it's probably an escape from all those people and fandom and just the chaotic lifestyle of the road as well. Like, well, if I just do this, I'm just gonna pass out and go to sleep and go into my la la land and like it probably starts out as maybe a relaxation technique, and then turns into an addiction and
then
an
it's all you
excuse,
do,
and then it's
like,
just
it becomes your life. Yeah.
I mean, I think too, a lot of times this is poor coping skills. Like these guys have stress, anxiety, and they don't know how to deal with it right, and then they self-medicate.
Yep.
As so many of us do. I do think that probably how he grew up played a role in that. Like he probably, he had all this money and he had things to do, and he was treated differently because he was black, and he grew up poor, and then all of a sudden they have all these people that are throwing things at him. He's got all this money and things like that and attention. It was probably overwhelming for him.
Oh, for sure.
So, what if he hadn't died? I think based on that documentary I watched, I think they would have got back together. I think that if they had all gotten clean, like that probably would have kicked his butt into gear, and I think they probably would have put out some albums that, like, I think would have probably been good rock albums, but not necessarily well received because it was the 80s.
True. Yeah.
I mean, they're not a band that had a lot of hits. I mean, they had a couple, and and they certainly had their fans. I think, like, oddly, I remember that Axl Rose was a fan, and I think some other guys coming up that was sort of like a deep cut band to be into, in some way.
Yeah, obviously I wasn't a fan of them back then because I was quite young, but that part of it I don't know. Like, I don't know how, like, what they were perceived as like
I think they were kind of oddly influential among some other bands. There's a song on Jailbreak. That's the only album of theirs I like really know. I think it's the last song called The Emerald, and it feels kind of like proto heavy metal to me, like in a way.
Yeah,
like
I
it
think at
kind of-
times they had some wild riffs.
yeah,
like, for
and
sure.
those dueling harmonic guitars that they would, the guitar harmonies they would do. Like, I don't know who was doing that before them in like a hard rock context.
Maybe they
So-
would have kind of went down the vein and did stuff like Quiet Riot and stuff like that. Maybe they would have got a little bit harder than they were doing. Like me, like, their songs are great, but like the Cowboy song, that's it for me. Like that is such an artistically beautiful
Oh yeah, you
song.
like yeah.
I just love that song. And they had a bunch of different band members, so we probably would have seen different lineups at different times. I think they have gotten together after his death a few times, like the band, and done shows and things like that. Obviously, whenever you lose a lead singer, that it loses some steam from the band.
Yeah. I mean,
So-
bass players you can replace, but
Right. Drummers you can replace. All right.
I just you jogged something else in my memory too when you were talking about the racism of the day there, and I don't know if you know John Lydon wrote an autobiography years ago, and it was called "No Irish, No Blacks, No Dogs," which was like a sign that they would see hung up in English, businesses when he was a kid and moved there. He was Irish, like
The Irish were
migrated.
treated poor. I remember
So
that.
yeah, so no Irish, no blacks, no dogs.
Yeah. All right. So this last part of the show, I wanted to do this segment where we had talked about artists selling their entire catalogs to businesses. And I was taking a moral issue with it. Like I was like, this is messed up. I don't like this. It's cheapening the music. And I got kind of worked up about it. And then I did some research on it, and I actually found out some kind of wildly like crazy stuff. So like we kind of go back to 2020. Okay. So the pandemic hits, touring stops abruptly. People are trapped in their homes. Some people are losing their jobs, and many people just aren't working in general. So what happens? People start tightening up their belts financially. They're being cautious with their money. Okay. So obviously people aren't spending money on music. Mm-hmm. And this, like your friend Carter, he was doing shows from his living room on the internet, and probably living off donations of people for it. And a lot of bands were doing that. Not everybody's Bruce Springsteen, not everybody's the Beatles, where they got millions and millions of dollars to like live off of.
Yeah.
So what happened? So we got these two companies that kind of came in out of nowhere. One is called HIPGNOSIS, Hypnosis. Is that, songs. And then the other one is Primary Wave. So publishing rights usually stay with the publishers and the songwriters, whereas recorded rights usually stay with the labels and the performers. So basically, we had these two companies snatching up rights. So here's just a few of them. The Hypnosis, they bought all of the rights for 10cc, 50 Cent, the B-52s, Barry Manilow, Blondie, Charles Bradley, classic soul singer, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Journey, the Chainsmokers, Sum 41, and then we got Primary Wave. They bought up like the Sun Records catalog, which had like the early Elvis, Johnny.
That's a huge purchase. Oh my goodness.
Johnny Cash, a portion of Prince's rights, Bob Marley, Smokey Robinson, the Culture Club, Boy George, Alice Cooper, even. So, and then this Hypnosis is actually traded on the stock, like the London stock market. So, you think about this for a second. So you got gold, you got platinum, you got gas stocks. They tend to like fluctuate up and down. That doesn't happen with music. Music kind of stays consistent. People are always ingesting music. People are ingesting music in their cars, in their homes, while they're at work. So what do you think happens when you have these two companies that are buying up all of these rights to music as a way to make money for like publishing and so on? What do you think happens?
I think it's going to be like the radio stations where you hear the same 4 songs for eternity.
Well, these
Like you were talking about,
these mega companies like, BMG and all these companies that own like Sony, they're like, well, we're not going to have these two small companies buying up all the rights to these music because they're our most heavily traded commodity. So they start doing it. So that's why we started having all of these big companies buying up their bands' catalogs, is because they didn't want these two small companies, Primary Wave and Hypnosis, buying up all these songs and controlling the market, because they control publishing of merchandise, the music. Think about this. Like, records are popular. What if they just decided we don't want to make records?
Yeah. Yeah, when you have a monopoly on anything, it's never a good thing.
Right. And these two companies were just going through and snatching up just all of these rights. So anyway, these guys started buying up stuff. So imagine back in like the late 90s and early 2000s, you remember like when peer-to-peer was really big, like Pirate Bay essentially had these giant record companies buy the balls, and they were just gutting them financially. So I think these record companies learned to be aggressive. They're like, well, we're going to put up a fight. These small companies are buying up all these bands. We're going to do it. Universal Music Group paid nearly $4 million to acquire Bob Dylan's song catalog. COVID, but why are the artists doing it? That's another good question. They probably had bills to pay.
Well, I think there's that, but a lot of these artists are old. I mean, Dylan, Fleetwood Mac, I think, just did it, and some other. They're
it's
older.
Like
I think they're
cashing in their 401k. So to speak.
like they only got so many years left. Like, why not?
Well, yeah, like Dylan's a good example. Estate planning. Think about how many grandkids he probably has.
Yep.
How many relatives and things like that. So he's like, well, they're going to have this legal fight where someone's going to control this music and stuff like that. And that's really going to affect how much money everybody gets. That's not going to happen when he has all this money in. He's going to be like, nope, you get this much, you get this much, you get this much.
Yeah, kind of.
Nobody
you
will
take
ever
away that,
fight about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you kind of take that stress off of your family. It's like, well, you've already gotten it, and it's done. It's kind of a clean slate. Sometimes too, I think with artists, maybe some of the younger ones, like with, I think, probably like that, kind of like with Taylor Swift and whatever, and that her whole situation in mind. Some artists might be like, you know what, you can have this old stuff. She's already kind of made her money off it, or that artist has already made their money off it. And they've kind of like learned, like, hey, like, I don't want to be under the thumb of these big record companies owning, 80% of the rights or whatever the percentages break down on. And like, hey, why don't I take this? I'll just sell everything. You can have it. Get this big chunk of money. Now I can produce all my own stuff and own 100% of it. And screw you guys. I'm sure there's probably some of that going on with artists. Like, hey, this is what's going to finance my next big art project, my next big album, my next big studio purchase, whatever. It's kind of like when people that win the lottery, you can either take the payout.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things I was going to bring up.
You can get $300 a week, or $3,000 a week, or whatever it is, or you can just get that one lump sum. It's not going to be nearly the amount, but you can do so much more when you have one big chunk of cash, rather than like just these monthly payouts. So it might be feast or famine in some ways, but maybe you can do better and build your brand and your business up by having that power of a large sum right now.
Right. It could take 20, 30 years in some cases for them to make that much money. And you get somebody that's like, I'll do it right now.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, and I didn't see this, but I'm sure a lot of them still, they're like, I can still play these live. And they're like, yeah, you can still play these live. I'm sure that they're not, because like Springsteen sold his stuff. And he still tours. I'm sure he can still play his stuff live.
Yeah, he does covers now, strictly. He does all Springsteen covers.
He's a Springsteen tour
tribute band.
Tribute band. Thank you. I'm laughing so hard I can't even talk.
One of the other things that was kind of a big part of it was, and I didn't fully understand this, so I didn't go in depth on it, but the tax benefits are changing, and essentially some of this was going to become more expensive for artists to own the rights to their music and to publish and stuff like that. So they were getting big tax benefits by selling their music
as well, yeah.
Their music off. And then there's also some like really specific situations, like Shakira. She sold her stuff, but she was going under tax evasion suit in Spain. So like she probably sold her stuff because she needed to come up with some money to deal with that.
Oh, yeah.
But then she had a huge hit and is back on top. So whatever.
It must be rough.
It must be hard to just, pop down, pick your phone up and, put some music. But my question for you guys is like, when we have an artist who like sells their music, do you think that as collectors that impacts us negatively in any way?
That's a good question.
I think it can maybe like, because we got this company who's, you know, concerned about profit, controlling what's released and when it's released and content. Like they maybe won't have as loving connection to it as some of the musicians might. Like, I'm not saying that the musicians don't want to make money, but a lot of times they're concerned about, you know, making their fans happy also. So I think we might suffer from that aspect.
I mean, I don't know. Whatever we buy is always just coming from the record companies anyway, for the most part. I mean, you know, whether or not it's a quality release or not, you know, I mean, this is actually right why CDs got such a bad rap, even though, like, I mean, CD quality is great, but the record companies rushed to, like, put all their back catalog on there, and everything was, like, mastered, you know, poorly. So it actually just, in the end, it didn't sound as good as a lot of people's record collections. And they're like, why is this so great? But, you know, so that was them not caring and just wanting to make a buck real fast. So you're right. We do suffer in that way. But they just, you know, they'll sell us the same music 5 times over. It's, hey, now it's remastered.
Yeah, like, oh, this time it's on blue.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, this week it's red. Like,
Blue sparkle.
I know some people like that I've met online and in some music groups that are big vinyl heads, and they'll be like, yeah, they're like, I got it on this version and this splatter version. It's like, who really needs 7 different versions of the same album? Like, I'm not typically the type of guy that's going to do that. I mean, like,
I'll buy a repress of something because it's easier to find and I'm not going to pay a fortune for it. But then if I come across a good deal of an OG copy of something, that's about the only way I'll end up having 2 copies of something.
Yeah, like, and I did, like, I remember Brian Fallon, one of my favorite artists, he put out one of his, I believe it was his second solo album, and then like 6 months later he did like a pink release version of it. It was like to benefit breast cancer, and I was just like, I got some extra money, and it was like a $20 record. It wasn't this big extravagant expense. But I was just like, yeah, you know, I have a little extra. It's going to a good cause. Yeah, and I got, you know, it's like, oh, and I'll never play this copy. So if my original copy gets screwed up, I can still play it. Like, that's kind of my thing. But that was a pretty rare thing for me to buy a double album of it. I think I have a Gaslight Anthem, their first album. I have a second copy of that because I believe the first copy that I bought was a colored reissue, and this was like an original pressing, like, from UK. And it was on black vinyl, and I think black vinyl sounds better than colored vinyl. I did do some research on that, so it's a topic from a different episode. But there's some misconceptions about that sound quality thing. So sometimes you're right, sometimes you're not. But we'll get into that at a different time.
Fascinating.
So, my last question for you is: do you think of less of artists who do this?
Not really.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, it's. I think that's such a personal decision. That, you know, typically there's probably going to either be a hardship that they just, you know, like they need to pay legal fees or tax stuff or whatnot, or maybe they have, you know, family medical expenses and that you just don't even find out about.
There's a lot of stuff we don't find out about.
Or maybe they just are like, hey, you know what, like, I don't really want to work anymore. I don't want to tour. You know, I'm 78 years old. I only got so many years. Like, I just want to buy an island. Like, I'm just going to take all the stuff I worked my butt off for. I mean, whatever their reasoning is, as long as they are doing it not under duress, good for them. Like, if you could, if I could, you know, if I was a painter and, you know, I sold a couple of paintings here and I made a decent living, but I never really, like, hit big, so to speak. But then all of a sudden somebody came along like, I love your stuff. I want to buy you out. Everything you've ever done. Fuck yeah, I'd take it.
That's a really great point. It's like, people don't think ill of an artist who sells their stuff, but a musician.
Yeah.
There's like a stigma about it that you got to have this like hard chain of ethics.
Yeah.
So, me, you know, my first gut reaction was, I would think less of them, like it was cheapening the music some way. After doing this research and thinking about it, no. As long as they can still play their songs live, in case I want to see them live.
Well, you know, so many. I mean, classically, forever. I mean, musicians have basically been swindled into giving away the majority of their rights to the record companies in the first place. So the
John
fact,
Fogerty.
yeah. So the fact that like they're actually able to have the opportunity to sell it and get like sufficient recompense for it is like
Yeah, absolutely no issue with
Yeah, they're
that.
probably winning, so to speak, on a better level or a higher level by kind of a bulk sale rather
Being
than
able
just
to do
like
that, yeah.
getting their 15 or 20% or 5%, whatever their deal was,
2% a record or something. Yeah.
So they're overall they're probably winning and like, oh my gosh, I can actually pay my bills comfortably,
Right.
So I say good for them in most every situation. Hopefully, like they're not like say that like the decision capabilities are in the lead singer of a band. And hopefully, like, if that person would make the decision to sell these rights, hopefully he's not screwing over the other artists that have even probably small, the smaller percentages, and just taking everything away from them.
Correct.
Because, that would probably irk me out a little bit if I found out that was the case. But
that would upset me. So we're gonna start wrapping stuff up here. We got a couple things we got to talk about first. First thing, I got to answer Sue's question from earlier. What am I into right now? So I picked up Weezer Seasons Spring, which was the first of their 4 EPs they released this year. That's the only one that's out on vinyl yet because there's such a delay on vinyl pressings. I did listen to their Winter EP, which is wonderful. It sounds like old Weezer, like the really like kind of emotional stuff. That's awesome. The Arcs released their new album. So this is Dan Auerbach's other band. It's called the Electrophonic Chronic. That is probably one of my favorite things I've like listened to lately, and I've been going back to it a lot. I would kind of describe it as kind of like almost psychedelic at times and like soft and ambient, but yet beautifully artistic. There's not a harsh blues riff on that entire album. It's wonderful. It was so refreshing to hear that. And then other than that, just random things here and there, but those are probably the two big bands. You guys got anything special you've been into? We don't need to like give me a huge list, but anything.
Yeah, I've just lately been kind of just going through. I finally got a bunch of good quality plastic sleeves, and I've been going through like.
I forgot my inners for you. I meant to bring for you. I'm sorry.
No worries. So I've been going through and just making putting anything that needs to be in the protective sleeve in that.
Just a little housekeeping.
Yeah, and just and so I've just been going through. I've actually been listening to a lot of Beatles lately, which is
really unusual for you.
Yeah, it's pretty unusual for me. And a lot of I just kind of got back into like some of my old country stuff lately. I was just like, oh yeah, like I got like some of these things. I'm like, why do I have 3 copies of this? And like, I should at least listen to it. And I'm like, oh wow, this is great. Just kind of comparing like
you forget about things,
different pressings. And I'm like, oh yeah, like I'll see what what the difference is. And typically there's not much of a huge difference. Usually it's like, oh, this one's really scratchy, because it's been kicked around, hasn't been in even a white, in a paper sleeve. It's just been in the jacket and for run around for the last 20 years, so they're pretty noisy, but just kind of been going through old stuff, which has been kind of neat and refreshing. It's like, oh yeah, like it's almost like new music that I didn't have to pay for, which is great because I'm cheap.
Right.
You're not lavish like me, just dropping too much money.
Yeah.
How about you, Stu? Got anything you're super into?
Oh man, well I picked up a few records when I was in Madison the other day at Mad City Records.
And you got me so?
I did, yeah. And I picked up the new one was King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard.
I've briefly experienced that. That is great. I love those.
Yeah, and this is only the second album of theirs that I've bought. So, and I think they do different stuff. Like I think maybe dramatically on different albums. But the one I got was Flying Microtonal Banana. That's a psychedelic experience.
I'm gonna check that out because I've listened to like 2 other albums. I don't own any.
Skip the first song. The first song, Rattlesnake, isn't as good as the rest of the album.
Yeah.
At least don't start there. I got a Mike Oldfield box set. I think it's like his first 4 albums. And Focus. This is actually another like Danish prog rock band. Focus.
You and your prog rock.
3. Yeah. Well,
He's gonna come up with a nickname here.
In my car, I'm listening to Aretha Franklin and Megadeth. So There you
Nothing
go.
wrong with that.
Yeah, he's pretty eclectic, but
I love that about him.
we're actually gonna have to start calling him prog rocks too.
I
Get a
think that's
fight with disco. Stu?
PRS.
Yeah.
PRS too.
Or Purse. We'll call you Purse. And people be like, what the hell's up with that nickname?
They're gonna think like you're calling him gay or something.
Right.
So
Man purse.
Man Purse.
man first, Merce.
Yeah.
So another thing.
Well,
we
you're
want-
a Merce.
Hey,
You're the Merce in the
technically, I'm
room.
a male nurse. Yeah. So just a reminder, you guys can find us on Facebook. We are Just One More Record podcast. We got an Instagram page that Steve runs. Obviously, if he's in Montana, that might be a little slow for a bit.
Yeah, I'm still not sure what the internet, how well the interwebs reach out there. So yeah, it'll be a little bit hit or miss there as well.
If the wind is good.
If the wind is good and
Yeah.
it's not snowing, which I hear it's been snowing quite a bit out there.
And it depends on if anyone's got their COVID vaccines, so they can get their 5G. A little conspiracy joke there for you guys. So as always, thank you for listening to us. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to us talk about all the dumb stuff we talk about. And most importantly, just remember, there's always more vinyl.